Hello, my name is Roman Dzindzi, and I want to introduce you to a certain way of thinking. On this project, I don't want to show you how to make the best move. What is the best move? That's not the way to learn chess. Very frequently when I give chess lessons or I lecture or I analyze game with some lower rated players, frequent question or frequent comment on my analysis is, oh, I would never make this move, I would never find this move, or I would never choose this plan. And whoever says that, they don't realize one thing. Of course, strength in chess means a lot, but also the way of thinking. Now, if your knowledge is for about on the level of 1500 player, you want to maximize your knowledge. If you are 1500 player or 1200 player or 2500 player. So how to maximize this knowledge? You have to realize and organize the way you think. Now, on this series, I want to introduce you to a certain way. I especially selected games I want to analyze. They are games of mine and people I worked with. So, for instance, I don't want to analyze games of Botvinnik or games of Capablanca. They are the greatest players maybe in the history, games of Fischer, because those are not the people I worked with. People I worked with are Anatoly Karpov, Gata Kamsky. They are all world's top players from at one time or another. And also I worked with Karpov, Kamsky, Korchnoi, and my student Eugene Perlstein, who is as good as any Grandmaster also, and myself. So I want to give those games, analyze those games, because then I can explain you how thinking was going, because I thought together with those people and I know the way their thinking were going there, how they were considering various different plans and variations and how they were coming to certain conclusions. This is going to be very, very helpful, and let's see the way that how can you think this way. Now, if you start thinking the way they do, that does not necessarily mean you will start making the same moves, but you will start think like this, and then that's where your knowledge will kick in. So then you will be getting closer and closer to the Grandmaster way of thinking. Let's start with the first example of one of the best positional players maybe in the history of this game, Anatoly Karpov, whom I worked with for considerable amount of time and analyzed a lot. So this is his game against he played against readers of a wide range of readers, where a lot of masters and grandmasters were involved in some Russian publication newspaper. So e4, this is Alekhine defense, knight f6. I'm not gonna make the emphasis on the opening part because that's not our incentive. That's not our priority now. Knight d5, d4, d6. This is actually the variation of Alekhine defense that I like to play myself. E takes d, c takes d, knight c3, g6, and one of the popular ways to play is bishop e3, bishop g7, rook c1, castle, pawn b3. Now this is one of the critical positions of Alekhine defense, and one of the popular moves is e5, and the other is knight c6. Knight c6 is the move that was played in this game. d5, knight e5, and bishop e2. This is all theory. In this position, black played f5. I think much better move is e6, but that's we're not going to analyze the theoretical part of the opening. So f5 was moved. Now, based on Karpov's way of thinking, he immediately detects the weak square. Well, that's how we can think. Now, how can you think about this position? Let me look at this position from the point of view of a weaker player, or not so much a weaker player, but a player that sees only games that, as a threat, that he thinks that black has a terrible threat of f4 and the white is undeveloped. That's the one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is that black has a hole on e6 square, and I think that's the most important point in this position, most important factor in this position. I had this position myself many times, and in my opinion, the best move is knight f3 here, and I've played it many times. Well, move was chosen by Karpov was f4, which also makes a lot of sense, but I don't like as much. I think the both moves make great sense. Well, and Karpov played f4, and after knight g4, bishop takes g4, pawn takes g4, knight e2. What he wants to do, he wants to exchange dark square bishop and mount his knight to e6 square. Now, e6 square is bad, weak square for black, and also e7 pawn, black's e7 pawn is a weak pawn. After knight e2, but first thing white has to do is to conclude development. Knight e2, and in this position, black played knight to d7. They see that black's knight on b6 stands badly, and they want to relocate it to some better square. But the way I want to do is I want to put an emphasis here on the white's moves, white's plan, and white's way of thinking in this game. So after knight d7, obviously white castled and concluded development. Knight went to f6, and now bishop d4 move makes no sense because white is not exchanging bishops, so they went knight d4, targeting the e6 square. That's the general plan in this position. Black went knight e8, and this is understandable. Black realizes that e6 square may be a problem, so they try to put the knight on c7, controlling e6 square. After knight e8, white went knight e4. And again, now, let's think about this position. What can we see here? We have the weak square on e6. Now, how can we come to right conclusion and right development of this plan? So obviously, white's plan should be putting pressure on e-file, where the weak pawn on e7 is, and also taking advantage of the e6 square. Now, let's see what can go to e6. Knight can come to e6, but if we go knight e6 right away, is it good? Of course not, because black is going to take this knight, and then white does not have e6 square anymore. Besides, black does not have e7 weakness anymore. Knight e6 is not a good idea, but it's good to put the knight on e6 and keep it there. So we cannot stop black from taking it. So there is another piece that can support pressure on e6. One of the good plans will be to put rook on e-file. That should be done because rook's supposed to stay on e-file. And the other thing is, let's try, we know that of minor pieces, white's dark square bishop can never get to e6 because dark square bishops never go to light squares. So how about the knight on c3? Move knight e4 was made with a clear intention of playing knight g5. And after knight g5, you see the e6 square becomes a real problem. After knight e4, black played bishop h8. Well, it's this move makes sense. I don't really like it very much, but the black wants to cover e6 square by playing maybe knight g7. Well, they could have done it by playing knight c7, but then knight on c7 is very passive. Either way, black's position is poor, already very bad. Bishop h8, and now white goes queen e1. Well, of course, they could have continued knight g5, but then black goes knight g7. So move queen e1, knight g7, and queen to f2. Okay, now white wants to put rooks on the e-file. So basically, what white wants to do, put both rooks on e-file, remove the bishop, establish total control on e6 square, and put pressure on e7 pawn. That's a very simple plan. And I think this is the type of position that should be played on equal level by a player of Karpov's caliber and player of reasonably good level, maybe 1900 player. So you know what you want to do, and you have practically no resistance from black. So after queen f2, a6, rook f to e1. Okay, this is just putting rooks on e-file and trying to double them. Knight f5. Well, now what should white do here? White definitely has to take this knight because that's the only good piece in black's position, and it's a very powerful knight if we let it leave. So knight takes on f5, bishop takes on f5. And again, let's consider pawn takes f5. If pawn takes to f5, then we can just remove the knight back to c3. I don't want to go to g5 because after h6, we have to go knight e6, and then we lose control on e-file because bishop is going to take on e6 simply. So the correct move after pawn takes would have been knight c3 and then bishop to d4, exchanging dark square bishops and putting enormous pressure on e-file and practically ending the game. The reason those are my thoughts, and I don't believe any reasonable player can have any other thoughts in this position. So black tries to put bishop in the game, and bishop took on f5. This is a better move a little bit. Bishop takes f5. Now white goes bishop b6, and after queen d7, knight g5. Here the moment of truth. So knight goes to e6. This is the desirable outcome for white. Rook will take, and then double rooks on e-file, and you see black is practically stalemated. They can't move any piece. The pawn on e7 is very weak. F-file means very little to nothing, and bishop does not really have any good squares from on h8. So in this position, after queen d7, white went knight g5, and h6, knight to e6. Obviously, black cannot take it. Now it's especially worse because G6 pawn is a target as well as G4 pawn. After knight to E6, black played rook F7. And what would you do if you are not as strong of a player as a world champion and you said, I would never find a good moves? Here, now, next few moves, I believe that any reasonable player can play as well as anybody. So what white does, they just doubling. They have to bring C1 rook on E file somewhere. But rooks don't move like this. So white plays rook E3. And after rook C8, rook C to E1. Remember, why rook C8? You may criticize rook C8, but black does not really have any constructive plan or any moves that will somehow release the pressure. So rook F to E1, and then rook to CE to E1. Now in this position, after bishop F6, this is the difference between, this is difference in taste. Now, how would I play this position, and how would Karpov play this position? Now, if you give this given position to someone on Karpov's level, but little different style of player, they may find million different ways to improve the position. What I would have done, probably gone queen d2, then bishop d4. The way Karpov plays, he squeezes his opponent just like a snake, like python. So he does a4, and he goes a5 to make sure when he removes the bishop, black does not have any counterplay. Now that you can think your own way. That's, well, if you went queen d2 and bishop d4, something that makes sense. This is a good defending bishop on f6. Actually, black has both bishops that black has are good bishops. The problem is their pawn structure, which cannot be repaired. And pawn structure, it's like a terminal disease, and you have to take it, and you have to take advantage of it. Only way you can take advantage of it by exchanging those strong pieces. Well, queen d2 would have been normal plan. a4 is okay. Now we reach the point where the game is all done, the strategic part. So thinking like Karpov was thinking, which was very primitive thinking, but a very precise thinking. That's the way most of the chess games played, with exception of a high level of complexity, and we are not going to talk about those kind of games. This was very, very simple, very consistent, and very correct plan based on the pawn structure. So white went a4, then black played rook h7. Does this move make any sense? No, but so is any other move black will make. Has no sense in this position. a5, rook f7. Black is sitting and waiting. They have nothing else to do. Bishop d4. Here they exchange. He exchanges bishop. Only difference between my thinking and his, he put the pawn on a5 and then they exchanged bishops. Obviously, taking the knight is not good because pawn will take and fork on a queen and the rook. So white exchanges one of the black's bad bishops. So after bishop d4, king h7, bishop takes f6, and black plays pawn takes f6. Just notice that simply if rook takes f6, then by playing knight f8 check, it's just tiny combination, very elementary. And you know that just having plans, the knight f8, it's a part of, not part of planning. It's not something you plan for. It's something that your knowledge of combination. It's a simple tactical shot that can be equally quick found by a player of world caliber and a player of very mediocre or even 1500 players. They can find it easily. Knight f8 check, followed by, it's a fork on king and queen, and followed by rook takes e7 check, winning the queen. So obviously black takes the e with the e pawn, but what happens now? Now black does not have the weak e7 pawn, but now it's different problem. They have practically their pawn down because white has an extra pawn on a queen side, but black does not feel like they have an extra pawn on the king side. So bishop takes f6, ef, queen e2, now tripling on e-file, and again white cannot play rook, black cannot play rook e8 or rook e7. Black cannot challenge white because then simple knight g5 check will win the rook on e8. Well, on rook e8, knight g5 wins, and on rook e7, also knight g5 check, or maybe even knight f8 check. So after queen e2, black cannot challenge white on the e-file. After queen e2, black played rook g8. Black is preparing for final assault by white. Knight d4, rook g2, g7. Black is still hoping at some point play rook e7. Now white goes rook e6. This is an interesting move because white wants to eliminate black's light square bishop, black's bishop. But if they take on f5, then queen will take. But white wants to force black to retake on f5 with the pawn. So for this reason, white plays rook e6. It's a typical, Karpov is looking in this position, what kind of pawn structure changes he may want, and how to maximize on open file, E. Rook e6 is a very fine move, but as I would say, it's not the only way to proceed in this position. There are other ways. For example, there is nothing wrong at all with rook e8, followed by knight takes. Maybe, well, black is practically running out of moves. Maybe queen d2. But I would like to just change the switch positions of queen and the rook to put rook in front of the queen, and that will also would have won. But Karpov's way of playing rook e6, he disconnects queen and the bishop, is very efficient. But to notice that you do not have, this is not the stage where you have to think exactly like player of Karpov's caliber think. We are way beyond that. Now you can think any way that whatever makes sense. You can just keep the e-file open and start pushing on queen side. That would do the job as well. But rook e6 is maybe most precise way. Now we're talking about, you know, the shortest way to do it. After rook queen c7, knight takes f5, g takes f, and now white got the desirable pawn structure. Again, there is nothing wrong with simple b4 or queen d3, and now black probably has to go king g6, and now b4, and eventually start pushing. That would have won. I believe that would have won. The Karpov the way Karpov played it, queen e3. What he does is he does not want his opponent to play queen c5 or activate his queen in any way. Queen e3, that's another king g6, and now he goes queen to b6. Now after queen b6, black takes on b6, pawn takes. Now he has 4 rook ending, which is absolutely and unconditionally winning. The white has 2 rooks on open file, black can never contest there, and they have extra pawn on a queen side and potential of making a limited number of pass pawns here by pushing b4 and c5. The game is totally lost at this point. Rook d7, king f2, king goes in the center. King is a very significant piece in play in the endgame of any kind. So after king f2, rook g2 f7, king e3, rook f8, and king d4. There is the king in the center that will support movement of of white pawns. King d4, king f7, pawn to b4, and rook f to d8. Here, white has a big threat of c5, after which game is over. So black stops this threat by playing rook f to d8. Now after c5, you see pawn will take, and d5 pawn hangs. And this is the part I want to go through with relatively quickly, because this is like near the end. The main thinking and main planning was before, and now rook f8, rook 1 e3. Now those next 7 or 8 moves that Karpov made, they are far from being the only moves. Okay, there's a multiple way of winning. h5, rook e1, h4, rook e3. So what Karpov is trying to do to make sure that black has no moves. What can move? The h and g pawn cannot move, because white will just win a pawn. King cannot move practically, because if king goes away from e7 square, then after rook e7. You see, the point is that you cannot go with c5, because black is going to take on c5 and d5 pawn falls. But after king moves, white exchanges one pair of rooks, after which black is totally helpless because white goes c5. And this is a total Zugzwang. This is like a black is now totally squeezed, and black goes a5, b takes a, and rook a8. It's a desperation attempt, rook a to a3 and rook d to d8. And here Karpov finds the most efficient way to finish the game. a6, pawn takes, rook takes d6. Again, it's not the only way to do it, of course. Rook takes d6, sacrificing rook. And those pawns, the advantage, they are product of pawn structure advantage. They, of course, sweep everything on the way. Rook d goes to d8, b7, rook a goes to b8, and c6. This is, and on king e7, white win king c5. And white will most probably win both of black's rooks. So next is rook e3 check, probably then d6, then d7, and king b6. And black resigned here. Position is totally hopeless. Now this is a very, very good example of successful planning. The plan was very, very primitive. This plan is not the plan that only can be made by the Grandmaster. But I'm telling you, this is the plan that any reasonable player can think like this. You look at the position and outline what are the weaknesses of your opponent. And then don't forget of basic development, and coordinating your pieces towards the weaknesses, there is no move that was made by white in this game that can be difficult for anyone at all, level about 16 or 1700, they cannot make. They can make every one of those moves. They cannot make all of them, but if they think correctly, they can come to those conclusions. They can make most. They can. Well, then again, you do not have to make every one of those moves. If you give this position to another player like Kasparov, I can guarantee you that he would choose exact same plan. He might have executed it differently. He might have been a little more aggressive with it. It would have been exactly the same result, maybe by different means. But planning and thinking is what is important, what was important in this game, and he was very successful.